Now, with actors like 007 Daniel Craig coming out and saying that he will not leave his children a substantial inheritance because he finds inheritance distasteful, the topic of inheritance tax has raised its ugly head. It's quite the double-edged sword. The arguments in favour of keeping it are essentially that it's one of the least painful ways of raising tax and that it is a Robin Hood method of tax collecting, taking away from the wealthy and giving to the poor. On the other hand, inheritance tax cynics say that it's the most unjust and unfair tax of them all. You spend your whole life paying tax and then you're taxed when you die. Well, let's get the professional view now of the head of external affairs at the free market think tank, the Adam Smith Institute, and Morgan Schindelmeier. Hi, Morgan.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. We've spoken in the past. I hope I finally got the hang of your surname.
Yes.
We're getting there. Now, Morgan, is inheritance tax the wrong way to deal with goods that you wish to pass on to the next generation?
So there are a few things going on here. First of all, you talked about Daniel Craig, about he doesn't want to leave a vast inheritance for his children. Good on him. If that's how he feels, I know he's given his children a lovely life, I'm sure, with all of his money that he's worked hard to earn. I know he came from nothing and really made something of himself. But if he doesn't want to give it to his children, that's fine. But the idea that leaving something for your children is immoral in and of itself, and leaving something behind for the next generation is immoral, I think is shameful. I mean, I don't think we should be penalizing people for doing well, creating value, creating a name for themselves and assets that they want to give to their children. It's human nature to want to leave your children better than you were. So I think the inheritance tax is probably the wrong way to go about kind of generating tax revenue. It doesn't actually generate that much. Inheritance tax only generates about £5 billion a year, which sounds like a lot to most of us, but it's only 0.6 of tax revenue. I mean, VAT generates 100 billion, income tax is almost 200 billion. So this is really nothing in the grand scheme of things. And even more than that, it's not just the super rich either that we're talking about here.
Morgan, is it a disincentive to people to save and to invest while they're here?
It absolutely is. So the thresholds for income tax are probably lower than, inheritance tax are probably lower than most people think. It's $325,000, and if you include your home in the inheritance, it's only $500,000, which with rising house prices isn't really that much, especially in a city. So what people do is they spend their money. They spend their inheritance. They do things with their kids. They don't invest it. They don't save it because they know if they reach that threshold, they're going to be taxed at 40%. On money that's already been taxed. They've already paid tax on this. They paid income tax. They're paying VAT their whole lives. They're paying capital gains tax on all of these things, sales tax. So this is money that has been taxed sometimes many times over before you even get to what's called the death tax.
One thought, though, is that property is in a small number of hands, isn't it? And that seems to be a generational issue. And young people in particular, at the moment, have very little hope of getting on the housing ladder. So do you think in the long term, inheritance tax might be a little fairer, given the fact that it's only a proportion of people that will inherit a property in years to come?
That's very true. But what you're seeing again is that these aren't people of massive means. A lot of these people are the one family home that's just appreciated over the many years. And the kids may be forced to sell that home to pay the inheritance tax bill. So yeah, the house is still changing hands. But the problem with homeownership isn't inheritance. It's lack of homes. So we need to build more homes to redistribute that incredibly valuable asset across more people.
Is there a smarter alternative to inheritance tax?
Yeah, you could do something like a consumption-based tax. VAT is considered one of the fairest taxes that we have. It's the least distortionary. So something like that would be better. The thing about inheritance tax is it's incredibly easy to avoid. If you're of the very richest, you can ask your advisor to help you get around inheritance tax. You gift throughout your lifetime, you offshore your assets, those sorts of things. So the very richest just ask their advisor how to avoid paying inheritance tax, and they do. So again, this goes back to the middle class families who are passing down modest assets, houses to their children, who may not be able to keep the assets. They might be forced to sell the family home to pay the 40% bill, that sort of thing.
This will, won't it, Morgan, stick in the craw to those that, yes, have a property, but have been dealing with a massive mortgage on that property, perhaps for the entirety of their working career. And if they think that they're going to get taxed to oblivion when they finally pass away, they'll think, well, what was the point in that? Why did I struggle with a mortgage? I should have rented.
Exactly. So this is why this is considered one of the most unfair and unpopular taxes. It is double taxation. And when people say that inheritance is immoral, I mean, I guess the counter argument is asking some people to pay twice, be taxed twice on their assets is equally immoral. What metric makes it so that some people who are better off have to pay twice as much on their assets, which again, they've worked hard to create. Inheritance has this kind of dirty term that it's passing down Daddy Warbucks money all throughout the generations, but that's not the case. This value has been created at some point. Someone did work hard to earn this money, and again, it could be just one generation to the next. It doesn't necessarily need to be a Walton Walmart style family generation.
Yes, I mean, I do agree with you that the person that's actually bought the house and saved up to buy a house or other assets and possibly chipped away at a mortgage for decades and decades on end, I do feel that it's unfair to tax those people twice. But is it fair for a kid that's barely lifted a finger to inherit such riches? I mean, if you focus on the next generation, what have they done to deserve that?
Yeah, so this is, again, going back to the idea that this is only hitting the very richest, and that is the people that are sitting around doing nothing or, mommy and daddy pay for everything. But again, I like to reiterate that this threshold, when you include real estate, is actually very low. It hits everyday families, especially if someone dies suddenly. If you haven't gotten your affairs in order, you could be hit with a really big surprise bill. And if we're talking about redistribution and kind of creating a fairer, more equal society, you could look at other things besides just taxing people's inheritance, like our education system, like our housing system. All of those things would create a much more equal society instead of being punitive for people that have succeeded.
Morgan, would you raise the threshold so that you pay inheritance tax on a higher value, let's say £1 million, or would you scrap it altogether?
A fairer, more easy to understand flat tax base is always better because it is harder to avoid. Again, if you're raising the threshold, you're just still going to get people that are doing loopholes, avoiding it, and you would still kind of catch some people who just happen to fall into this threshold. So I would scrap it entirely and look for something that is harder to avoid and much more targeted and less distortionary. Another thing about inheritance tax is it as you say, it doesn't encourage investment. It also doesn't encourage people to come to the UK, set up businesses, and achieve wealth. They know that their assets are then going to be taxed at 40% when they die.
Now, Morgan, I don't want to put you on the spot. You may not have the exact figures, but do you know how we compare roughly to, let's say, the United States or other European countries when it comes to inheritance tax? Are we on a par, do you think?
I know that the US has a similar, they call it the estate tax. It's something similar in place. Their threshold is much higher, and they don't have the same exceptions for giving throughout your lifetime. So if you give throughout your lifetime, there's no kind of penalty if you die shortly thereafter, the way that the UK has.
And it's very motivating. It leads to an aspirational society in which you want to buy a property, pay it down, achieve other things in your life so you can hand it on to the next generation. If you think you're going to be clobbered by Rishi Sunak, you won't bother.
Absolutely. And that's one of the most distortionary things about inheritance tax is it discourages people who, have ideas of making it in life, and they think, what's it all for? And again, I said earlier, it discourages people from coming to the UK and wanting to set up businesses and put the rest of their tax base in the UK. If you don't want 40% of your assets taxed when you die, why would you keep any of your other assets here, any of your income tax, any of your capital gains tax? So if you remove this, actually, again, very small portion of the tax base, you will get much bigger returns because more people will be willing to keep their assets in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, 40% is extraordinary. I know there's a threshold, but I mean, 40%, that's almost half of your assets, given the fact that you've already achieve those assets post being taxed. It does seem quite unfair. Finally, and with the clock against us, Morgan, given the parlous state of Britain's financial affairs at the moment, we've got that 2 trillion quid's worth of national debt. We're going to have a budget deficit for the foreseeable future, which means that we're spending more than is actually coming in. So this tax is not going away, is it?
Probably not. I don't see many taxes going away, unfortunately. But the thing that we really need to know is we're not going to be able to tax our way out of this deficit. It just isn't possible. So the only way that we can really kind of come out on this, on the other side, is to go for growth, to use a very popular political term. But it is the case. You need to make sure that we're creating a productive economy to come back from this financial disaster.
Morgan, do come and join us in the studio soon. Morgan Schondelmeyer is from the Adam Smith Institute. She's their head of external affairs.